All right, moving on to the gearbox. This is the plug where you would check your fluid level and you would also fill it from. Crack it loose so it's easier for the fluid to drain. See how it's got, this is 500 miles. It's got a little bit of fuzz on it. Nothing major. So we're going to wipe that off and continue monitoring it as time goes by. You're going to get a little bit every single time. So here we are under the bike. Gearbox, drain plug, 17 millimeter socket. This one I prefer to use an extension. Slide the drain pan underneath and prepare yourself. Ta-da! It's got a little bit more than what the fill plug had. That's expected because it's on the bottom. But honestly, the amount that I'm seeing here for a first gearbox change is nothing out of the ordinary and nothing that concerns me. And after a millennia, you'll be able to wipe this and get the drain plug in. Tighten this up and then torque it to 22 Newton meters or 16.2 foot-pounds in the United States. Or like I do, I just go 16 even. And if it needs a little bit more, then I do that later, but most of the time 16 is fine. Old bikes used to use 2050 mineral oil, whatever brand the factory was getting. After we started dealing with Motul, they went from 2050 mineral break-in oil, which was the Motul 3000 SAE 20W50, that's what they were using. More recently, they went to Motul Gearbox SAE 80W90 mineral oil. This is for the break-in. But in the United States, we can't get that exact product. So what they supply us with is 75W90, which is actually, it's labeled for, you know, Harley V-twins, but doesn't matter. 75W90 gear oil, whatever one you choose. This is actually synthetic. This is what I'm going to be putting in because this is what I have available. So you're at home, you don't keep all these numbers in your head. You don't want to get your paper manual all dirty. You can go online like I showed you before, and you go to the gearbox oil replacement section for your specific year, 2017 in this case, and it says I need to fill this with 0.9 liters of recommended oil. So 0.9 liters is actually 0.951019 quarts. So we're going to be using almost 1 full quart in the gearbox. Oh, don't you just love cracking open a brand new bottle of oil? Got my grandfather's pocket knife here. So when you think you've got the appropriate amount in, pull your funnel out, and if you watched my first oil video, I talk about the newer bikes having drain plugs, or having fill plugs with indicator marks on it that the older bikes don't have. Remember, this bike just came with a magnetic drain plug looking fill plug. What you're going to want to do is, if you look down in there with a good light, you should be able to see oil just at the bottom of the threads where it's threaded into the case. Oil should be right at the bottom of those threads. If it is, that's your URAL accurate way of telling if you got enough fluid. Now, if you go back and watch the first video I did on checking fill levels, the other bike I was working on at the time was a newer model of 2020, I think, and it had the little dipstick on it with 2 marks. Those are also retrofittable to the older bikes. Same thread, they'll fit in the case. And if you have one of those, it'll be to the top mark. Wipe the surface of any contaminants, put our fill plug back in. So now we're going to move on to the final drive. And again, the drain plug underneath is 17 millimeters, but the dipstick on the top is actually 19 millimeters. And on the newer bikes, they got a breather here on the case, so you're not going to have a problem getting the oil out. But I still like to crack the dipstick fill plug. And just have it hang in there. Now, if you have an older bike, you're probably used to seeing a dipstick that looks like this. So this is actually a case from an old drum brake bike, and the dipstick was pretty much in the same spot. We have new castings now and things like that, but so it was either most of the time it was a dipstick like this with a little breather on top. This can be retrofitted with a newer front case, but that's a lot of work. But if you wanted to where you had the breather here, and you could use the remote breather kit that we have, which routes a piece of line up to another breather tube up under the seat or something, so it doesn't create the misty, oily mess that used to be common with the older bikes. The old cases and the new covers do go together, and then right there, that's where the new breather would go. The dipstick is either going to be one of these two styles, and when you, as I said in my previous video, when you check these, either style, you're going to want to make sure it's filled to the top of the two marks. You're going to make sure it's filled to the top mark. So we're going to switch out to a 17 millimeter. And break that drain plug loose. And give that a few minutes to drain. And just like the other drain plugs, you want to inspect for anything unusual. This one had a little bit of break-in debris on it, or fuzz, like I said with the other ones. Nothing unusual. You don't want to see any large chunks or anything. Other than that, it's pretty normal to get some buildup on these magnets. Now, what I was talking about, the crush washers, the aluminum crush washer, 2 to 3, maybe 3 to 4 service intervals. The rubber bonded ones, those are so susceptible to abrasion from putting them on the threads or screwing them into the case and tightening them down that these are actually recommended to be replaced every single time. So if you want to keep what originally came on your bike and go with the bonded rubber, that's fine. But if you want to swap to the older style aluminum crush washer, you can do that too. You can swap those back and forth. It's really not going to hurt anything. Now for filling this, for this particular model year, it says fill the final drive with 135 milliliters for two-wheel drive and 105 milliliters for one-wheel drive. That's because the one-wheel drive case is a little smaller, it takes less oil. Now over the years, and depending on what year you have, you may recall off the top of your head, if you've had your bike a while, that your bike requires less or more fluid because it changed back and forth a little bit what the factory was recommending. And the reason for that was primarily due to the breather thing that we talked about a minute ago. When it was back here on the drain plug, I should say back here on the drain plug, in the old days, you would get a little misty ring of oil, heat, pressure, ring and pinion gear spinning around, building up. The fluid would evacuate out the breather and leave a misty ring. In hot weather, it might actually cause drips and some gear oil to run down the case, and it looks like it's a pretty drastic situation, when in reality it was just evacuating what it couldn't hold in the case anymore, doing exactly what the breather was designed to do. Or if it was overfilled, it would correct the level by evacuating out what it couldn't use, or what was too much. It would build up and kick it out. But over the years, when I were playing with breather location, and they were still getting a little misty ring here, a little misty ring here, they were changing the fluid levels to see if that made a difference, in conjunction with trying different locations for the breather. So over the years, there's been, the fill level for the final drive has changed a little bit. Whatever is recommended in your service manual, do that. If you don't have anything to refer to, like an owner's manual in your possession, like you bought your bike used and it didn't have the owner's manual, you can look at the owner's manual online for your bike going back to 2006. The factory is recommending 80 W90 oil for the final drive, but it's not available in the United States and Canada, so it's SAE 75W90. Now, in our case here, we're going to be putting the Motul synthetic 75W90 because that's what I have on hand. And as for the engine oil, in this particular bike, I put mineral oil, but after break-in, you usually break in with mineral oil, and then you can switch to synthetic. Using a synthetic motor oil on a motorcycle, oftentimes you're changing the oil more frequently than you would in your car, so I don't know if you really see the benefit to the expense. But if you wanted to, we have Motul 20W50, standard mineral oil and synthetic blend. In this one, I put the standard in because I took it out of the bulk drum, but it's a 2050. And then you got your 75W90 in the gearbox and 75W90 in the final drive. Okay, so that we've let it drain as much as it's going to drain. I've cleaned up the drain plug. Do as I say, not as I do. I'm reusing the bonded rubber, but you should it's recommended that you replace the bonded rubber one every single time. The aluminum one, like I said, 2 or 3 service intervals, and then replace it whether it looks good or not. Wipe anything that's dripping on the bottom there. Get that drain plug started. Get it snugged up, and then we're going to follow up with the torque wrench. Remember, as I said before, 22 Newton meters, or which is 16.2 foot-pounds. My torque wrench isn't digital, so I just set it to 16. Sorry, I was in the way. I just couldn't do it from my chair. With the difference in the recommendations over the years, I'm going to try an experiment here. We've got a 2017. This is supposed to be 135 milliliters. The new specification is 115 on the newer bikes. So we're going to fill this older bike to 115 and see what the Dipstick says. Take my favorite funnel here, and we're going to crack open a brand new bottle of 75W90 synthetic twin from Motul. This is what we get in the United States. This is what we sell online. That's why I'm using it, because I don't have bulk gear oil at my disposal. That should be real close, actually. That was just dumb luck. Take your dipstick. Now on the final drive, you're going to want to thread it in just till it touches. With your fingers, you don't have to use a tool. And actually, it is showing right below the top mark. You can do that one more time, just double check. So 2017 calling out for 135, 2019 and 20 calling out for 115. That's a difference of 20 milliliters. You're like, visually when you look at this thing, you dip it and check it, 135 milliliters would have probably been just above the line and you would have thought okay. Or I was real close to pouring in 115 milliliters in there with the bottle just by luck. But and that's right below the line. So I'm going to leave it like that until I warm up the bike and right around the parking lot. Then I'll check all the fluids again. And lastly, you take your swap out for your 19 or use a 19-inch wrench and snug up your dipstick. On the filler plug, I usually just tighten it up by hand. The reason I do the drain plugs is because they are immersed under oil, in oil, so they're on the bottom. So I torque those to specification just to prevent leaks. But the fill plugs, I usually just get them good and tight. And if after my test ride, checking the fluid, if I notice that they're leaking or anything, I'll just give them another little, eighth to quarter turn and tighten them down just so they're not letting oil spill out. And last on our list for this week's video is the air filter inspection. It's 500 miles. Most likely we won't need to replace it unless somebody drove through a sandstorm and I don't know about it, but we'll find out upon inspection. Again, I did a video on this when I first started doing these videos that goes into more detail about what I'm doing. So you can go check that video out if you want to see more detail and a comparison year over year. I am going to remove the side panel, and then you'll need a 4mm hex key, Allen wrench, whatever you want to call it, and start taking these screws off. There's 4 screws, 2 on each side. So once you get all these removed from the lid, don't leave them threaded into the lid. Take all 4 of these out, don't lose them. Gently move the throttle cable out of the way, lift up on the lid over here, and you're going to want to check for any wires, electrical connectors, anything like that. If you have anything aftermarket you've added, like a battery tender cable or whatever, make sure that's out of the way. And then you're just going to gently slide and maneuver and pull it out of the way. See, not too much to it. Whether it's a new bike or an older bike, while you're at this point, you might also want to get some good lighting and inspect the branch pipes. You can look around the clamps and around the connection points, particularly if you live in a warm climate where it dries out rubber components, or someplace where they use like a lot of salt on the roads that can corrode clamps or degrade rubber components. Any of those things that look like they've deteriorated a little bit, you're going to want to replace those. If you've got an older bike, we have the KOK compliance fittings for the old carburetors that come in a set with 2 gaskets, 2 of the rubber compliance fittings, and or the KOK rubber flange, carburetor flange, whatever you want to call it, and then 2 of the one-time use pinch clamps. Those come as a kit. Those should be available on the shop. If you don't see them on the shop, that means they're currently not in our stock, but you can contact your dealer and see, they most likely have these as extras on their shelf. So if you have one of the older bikes and you need an air filter, we have these, as well as your dealer can get this, or probably has it again on the shelf in stock. The old branch pipes were a three-piece design. You had the two rubber pieces connected to a steel intermediate pipe. These came out many years ago. It was actually a fix for the older carburetors for misalignment issues with the airbox, and that it was a little bit more forgiving than the three-piece design. And then, so we had these made, and we still sell them as a set. You get 4 clamps, worm drive clamps, and the one-piece branch pipe for the older carbureted bikes. And these are either available on the website currently, or they will be very soon. Taking this plate style filter out that is on the new bikes, this one actually looks brand new. And I can see light through it, and really easy. It doesn't even show any signs of dirt or anything. So we're going to reuse this one. As long as you got the filter out, you can look inside too, because of the breather that's on the motor here that feeds back for the recirculatory system on the bike. You want to check in here too to make sure that there's no oil that is leaked out of the T-fitting or any of the rubber hoses in here. And if anything needs to be replaced due to age or cracking or deterioration, replace those. And then if there's oil built up on the bottom, you just take a paper towel and wipe that out before you put the new filter in. New filters are available on our website as well as from your dealer. Assembly is reverse of what you just saw. Just put the filter back in. You just want to put the intakes now up over the alternator. Be mindful of the crossover pipe here and lay your throttle cable out of the way. There's plenty of slack. So you kind of got to angle it up there first to get it started. But once you're past that little hurdle right there, it goes into place pretty easy. That little crossover pipe is really that's the key to the whole thing. And if you're sitting up, you don't often see that obstacle. And then you put your 4 screws back in, just hand tight. You're not going to really torque them down. You can pull out the brass inserts on the airbox. Okay. And although I mentioned it in the other video, which I strongly encourage you to go watch, I do want to mention that as far as retrofitability, the old style metal airbox cannot be retrofitted with this new style. And the reason is the gas tank mounts used to be down below, and it won't allow passage of the snorkel or the front of the box. So that is one of the items, one of the changes we've made over the years that is not, does not cross over between years. I'm gonna test ride this bike and then check the fluids. So until next time, take care, and I appreciate you watching.